YouTube fan base. And Naomi, if you wouldn't mind pressing record, that would be a big help, because I don't know where my menu went since I'm screening. Yes, there we go. All right, welcome everyone. Where are we? What day is it? Today is Thursday, June 3rd, and this is our summer members meeting. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Taylor Roden, and I'm the Community Events Manager at Historic Seattle. I'm sure many of you have been to one of these before and know who we are, but if you don't, our mission at Historic Seattle is saving meaningful places to foster lively communities. And Historic Seattle knows that our properties and programs occupy the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples. And the acknowledgement that we share with you at all of our public programs is not a substitute for developing relationships with Indigenous communities or for honoring Indigenous stories as we share our collective history, but it's our first step in recognizing the people whose land we occupy. So before we dive into our awesome members meeting and hear from my colleagues and from David, I want to thank our sponsors for making our education programming possible. It's awesome that we're able to do free virtual events, and these are some of the folks we have to thank for it. So thank you to Bricklayers and Allied Craftworkers Local 1 Washington and Alaska, Daniels Real Estate, the Greystone and the Lodge at St. Edward Park, and Selin Construction. And I also want to extend a really big thank you to all of my Historic Seattle colleagues, Cindy, Jane, Naomi, Kai, Jeff, Eugenia, really everyone, but I'm clicking through right now just to make sure that I didn't leave anyone out, and if I did, I'm so sorry. But you're awesome, and thank you for all that you do. So how tonight's program will work is that Historic Seattle PDA Council Chair David Yearworth will kick things off with the constituency portion of our meeting, and then we'll hear updates from our staff, our senior staff. And then the second half of our program will be dedicated to Paul Theory's work and projects in Seattle. And that portion will be presented by Jeff Murdoch, who is our Advocacy and Education Manager. And just a quick reminder to everyone that this space, this virtual space that we're in together, is a safe space for all participants. And we don't tolerate racism, sexism, homophobic comments, discrimination, and insults. If we hear any of that, we will swiftly remove you from the meeting. And we just want to remind everyone to be respectful of the space. We are learning, we're listening, and we're exploring together. And really, we want to have a good time. And with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to David, and I'll stop my share so that we can hear from David.
Thank you, Taylor, and good evening, everyone. Welcome. Again, I'm David Yearworth, and I'm the chair of the Historic Seattle Council. And I'd like to start by convening our members meeting for the summer season. And so I will thank you for being here and convene and announce that the meeting is convened. I also want to say it's just nice to see so many people here, old faces, new faces on a sunny summer night. And we've got one main order of business, which is to approve the minutes of our last meeting, which was on March 4th. I'm wondering if there's any discussion, and if I could hear a motion to approve the minutes from the March 4th meeting, please. And if anybody's speaking, I can't hear you because for whatever reason.
A motion to approve.
Thank you. It's been moved. Is there a second? If someone could second, please, I'd appreciate it.
I'll second.
Thank you very much. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you very much. That's the main item we have for business. The only other thing we need to do is adjourn. And so could I have a motion, please, and a second to adjourn the meeting?
I'll motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you very much, all. And now I'd like to introduce Jane Davies, Historic Seattle's Director of Finance and Administration. Take it away, Jane.
Hello, everybody.
got my slides up. I'm going to run through just some quick finance and administration highlights for you. And then there'll be a time for questions at the end. This is fairly top level, so feel free to ask more, and you are always welcome to ask me questions separately from this meeting. If I could have the next slide, please. So I thought it might be interesting for a quick review about what audits Historic Seattle is subject to each year. We just completed one, and so it's been top of mind for me in the last few months. So the one we just finished is the independent financial audit. It is independent in that we hire an audit firm to review our books. It is done once a year, and it's usually done in the spring. It is required by our charter, and it's also required by the state. And I actually don't know if the city would require it, but we do report to the city as, I guess the charter is the city. So yes, it's required by the city. And what that audit does is confirm our financial statements and accounting procedures are in accordance with general accepted accounting principles. So it looks at our internal controls and our policies and practices and makes sure that the numbers that we present at the end of the year from our books are adhering to accounting principles that are generally accepted specifically by the Government Accounting Standards Board, called GASB. This year, we have new auditors, Greenwood, Olin and Company, and we were with another audit firm for many, many years. I think it was 13 years or something like that. So it felt like a good time to change for a fresh perspective and some different kinds of feedback, and move to a smaller firm. The firm we started with was very small and grew into a big firm and was then purchased by a really, really big firm. And we found that the smaller audit firm was a better fit for us. So it went really well, and it was completed and approved by council in May, and there were no findings, which is what is called a great audit, or you would call it an unmodified report, meaning that there was nothing noted that was not in accordance with accounting principles. So yay to the accounting team, which is a little bit of a self back pat, but there are other people and also the whole team at Historic Seattle who adheres to the policies and procedures that we make that make it possible for us to keep accurate books. The other audit we have is the state accountability audit. It is done by the state auditor's office, and it happens every other year. And this is more looking at whether an agency, which Historic Seattle is, adheres to state laws, rules, and our own policies and procedures. So they're kind of looking at us as if we are a city department, and that we adhere to the laws of the state. So that looks more at procedures and policies than numbers. They review our financial audit that the independent company does, and they accept it as the independent financial audit. All right, those are our audits, and they take a decent chunk of time. They're a pretty big part of what my job is, so I just thought it was important for the constituency to understand what all of our staff is doing all the time. All right, next one. So a quick review of our Q1, our first quarter highlights. So that's January through March 31st. We are looking at an under budget, which means lower than expected income in our real estate operations. Not really unanticipated because we're still dealing with some COVID, some lease payments that were affected by COVID. So we have some tenants that are unable to pay their lease because of COVID. We also have some meeting space that we're unable to rent because we're not yet able to gather in that way. So, so we're a little under budget there. That is made up in grants that we've received to cover that. Many of them are donations from people like probably a lot of you in the audience today that donated to our emergency rent relief. So the emergency rent relief is making up for that lost budget. And that's some of what you'll see in the next bullet, which is that our contributions are over budget, where we have received more donations than we expected in the first quarter. The other thing that's making me feel okay and making things even out is that the real estate operations expenses are under budget. So we're still trimming our expenses to sort of align with the fact that we're not making the money yet. And then the final, probably noteworthy thing is that our capital projects, so these are big projects like a new roof or a new porch or a resurfacing of a parking lot or things like that. They are under budget, but that's mainly due to timing. It's sometimes hard to align the budget with exactly when the invoices are going to come in, exactly when a project's going to start and finish. So we're still aiming to do these capital projects, but they're not quite in the Q1 timeframe yet. And that's kind of the highlight. I feel good about our first quarter. I think we're on track. And so there was nothing, no big ahas. All right. And also just to represent where we look at from a total perspective, you can see, I think my translation is covering up the bottom there, but the Q1 budget is the orange and the Q1 actuals are the purple. So you can see that our revenues are below what we would expect by the purple to orange on the first slide or the first bars. And then the second is that the expenses are also lower than expected. And that is it, I think. Do we have any questions? All righty. I will pass it on.
Thank you, Jane. So I am Naomi West. I'm the Director of Philanthropy and Engagement, and I will give you an overview of our programs and our fundraising and communications activity. We have a few upcoming online events that we're excited about. The next one is going to be on Lake Union and Seattle Maritime History on June 15th. We're also planning a History Collective event as part of our series in partnership with HistoryLink for July. We don't have a date quite yet as we're developing that tour, but it'll be featuring First Hill, and that'll be a conversion of the beloved in-person tour that Larry Kreisman, our former program director, has guided over the years. We're also planning an event with Candace Taylor related to her book on the Overground Railroad and specifically some of the stops in the Pacific Northwest, and that will be on July 20th. We haven't launched that yet. We're still finalizing things with her publisher and management, but that is the date that we're planning. And last, we are co-sponsoring the Beyond Integrity Conference in partnership with For Culture and the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, alongside Kennedy Whiters, who was formerly on our council and has been spearheading this conference. That will be in August, and we'll have more information to come soon on how to register for that. If you missed any of our programs, they're all available on YouTube, much like this one is streaming right now. And Taylor's been working really hard to make our programs go off without a hitch in the virtual setting. And we are looking forward to eventually returning to in-person programs, but we plan to remain virtual through the summer as things start to reopen, just because a lot of our content lends itself to this format, and it has been a way that we can reach a broader audience than through in-person programming. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. On the philanthropy and communication side, as Jane mentioned, we have had very generous donors keeping our tenants and our organization afloat over the past year. And in order to continue supporting the tenants who need help that reside and work in our properties, we continued raising funds for our emergency rent relief fund throughout the spring through Give Big and a mailing. And thankfully, we've received more than $60,000 from donors like you, and that has been providing direct relief to tenants and anchor partners in our buildings who need support as things start to reopen and people start to get back to work. We anticipate a final round of relief funding. We have the money available, so we'll be making that available to our tenants and anchor partners in July. Our 2020 annual report recapping the year spent on Zoom will be coming out shortly, so please stay tuned for that. And last, we are looking forward to, as I mentioned, starting to resume in-person activities. And at this point, we feel very hopeful that our preservation celebration, our annual benefit, will be able to be held in person at Washington Hall. The date for that event will be Wednesday, October 27th, and we plan to incorporate a live stream option for people who are not able or not comfortable with attending in-person events at that point. But we're very excited to be able to gather communities safely and within all of the recommended rules that are may still be in place at that point in time. So please stay tuned for more information on that event and the 2021 award recipients that we'll honor there. And that's all I have. Turn it over to Kai.
It's nice to see everyone. I'm Kai Kelly. I'm the Executive Director of Historic Seattle. Before I start, I want to give a little shout out. I see Kathleen Brooker, our former ED, is joining us. I just wanted to say hi to Kathleen and welcome everyone. I appreciate everyone taking time out of your evening to join us and sort of check in. And as always, we encourage this to be a dialogue and exchange of information, because that's how we get better. So as we slowly, I sort of feel like I'm a groundhog, just sort of peeking my head out of the hole and not knowing whether to come out or go back in. But as we start to slowly emerge from the pandemic, I thought it'd be smart to give everyone just sort of a brief update on Historic Seattle operations, and specifically sort of focused on our real estate. So as you probably all know, we have 8 properties within the portfolio, and particularly during this pandemic, our housing units, Egan House, Heg Phillips, Bellboy, Vic Row, and our 6 artist housing units at the Good Shepherd Center really have been a refuge for our community during this time. The Dearborn House, our offices up on First Hill, have been periodically and safely used by staff, and we're really looking forward to slowly transitioning from this strange, but now I think we're all accustomed to this sort of hybrid model, virtual model, to a slightly more traditional in-person work environment toward the end of the summer. Down in Pioneer Square, the National Park Service actually opened up the Cadillac Hotel under strict safety protocols, actually at the end of February. So that is open for business. We knew from the very beginning of the pandemic, the 2 properties that were going to be most impacted by the shutdown were going to be Washington Hall and the Good Shepherd Center. I'm happy to announce that on June 1st, just this week, the Good Shepherd Center had this sort of soft reopening to the public, and we're loosening access and use restrictions as tenants are really excited to sort of get back to the Good Shepherd Center and slowly resume a more normal, business operating model that they have. Because of the performance use of Washington Hall, that building certainly will be the last to fully reopen. But I will say that our anchor partners at the hall have continued to have really, thoughtful engagement with community through small meetings, gatherings, even presenting virtual programming and performances, and they really do, continue to do a great job connecting to the community. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I think we had a first of 2 community vaccine drop-ins at the hall, and I was proud to hear that we actually got a noise complaint from the vaccine drop-in. It was in the parking lot. I don't know what was going on over there, but I was actually happy to see that people were making some noise at Washington Hall, like people should. So if we could look at the next slide. So during the budget process last year, once we sort of had a firm grip on the economic impact that we were going to expect, as Jane alluded to, on income, we made a conscious decision to really sort of take advantage of the slow time at our properties to try to move forward with planning and execution of some, for us and for anyone, I guess, major deferred maintenance projects. The slide, the photo or the image on the left is shows the Good Shepherd Center and some of the seismic upgrades that will be happening. So we started the planning process for that earnestly. I gave a go-ahead to the architect, to the consulting firm just a couple weeks ago. We successfully received our Heritage Capital Award. It made it through the state legislative budget process. So that's $868,000. So the consulting firm is moving forward with the design and developing the permit set. So now, between now and when we really expect to start at really sort of the second quarter of next year, we'll be working on raising the necessary funds to create that 2-to-1 match that's required from Heritage Capital. The middle image is the sort of the back east side of Victorian Row. And we've moved forward with the design and the bidding, the landmarks approval on the replacement of that porch that you see there. We hope to have actually a contract in place within 60 days. Our real estate folks have done a great job finally moving that forward. And it may seem insignificant, but that porch is probably going to be $130,000 to $150,000 when we're done. So it's a pretty significant investment in the property that's desperately needed. The image on the right, again, sort of an interesting project. It was one of those projects is at Washington Hall. It's the parking lot where the hall looks beautiful, exteriors restored, and the parking lot was always this sort of leftover has been. We never focused any attention to it. Well, it's now done, and we had to replace the entire surface, regrade it, put in sidewalk improvements. We even put in a new commercial mailbox. Was very exciting to the anchor partners over there. So that looks great. Really matches the nice sort of completeness that is Washington Hall now. You can see next slide, please. We've replaced the roof on the Egan House. Again, another $20,000 roof. Pretty simple roof, but we had to have custom fabricated skylights. We had a hard time finding a match of the shingles to match the Reichert originally designed look and feel and color. So we were very happy to get this replaced. It had been leaking for some time. So again, another investment in a property. And lastly, on the right side, it's one of those projects where you start the cab and you don't know where the cab's going to end up, and it just costs more and more. We were having parking lot issues at the Dearborn House. There was a lot of subsidence around the perimeter of the lot. So we had to come in and unpeel the parking lot, start digging until we found something solid, which by the photos, indicates that they had to go pretty deep before they found anything solid, and then resurface the lot and stripe it. So again, in the grand scheme of things, something that had been on our list for a long time that we felt like really needed to get done. Slide, please. So lastly, I just want to commend and thank all council and foundation board members and certainly the staff for what we as a team and what you all have done on behalf of this team and on behalf of this organization since March. I cannot thank people enough for the patience and the creativity and the thoughtfulness and the determination that everyone's brought to the table. It's an unbelievable effort. And I'd like to thank everyone on this call, obviously, all of our members, our donors, supporters, constituents. You continue to participate and show interest and are connected to us through our virtual education programming led by Taylor. You continue to support our strategic advocacy work that's really exemplified by this great sort of socially distanced photo on the top right of the La Quinta apartments that we successfully landmarked a couple months ago. Want to thank everyone for the effort to continue to help us provide platforms for others to tell Seattle's full story and tell their stories, and to also honestly support us and as we communicate, to fully recognize that we need to be very intentional about the voice we use. we need to tell the truth about history. We are historic Seattle, and that's really important. Obviously, I also want to thank everyone for the continued financial support on behalf of our tenants of the Emergency Rent Relief Fund. Everyone on this call just continues to tangibly demonstrate that we're all in this together and that we're a part of a team, and we're certainly stronger together as a team than just as individuals. So I just want to thank everybody. With that, I want to turn it over to Jeff Murdoch, our Advocacy and Education Manager, and he's going to give us a little advocacy update. And then anything that you ever wanted to know about Paul Theory, Jeff is your man. He's going to tell you every single thing that you'd ever want to know about Mr. Theory. So with that, Jeff.
In 15 minutes or less.
15 minutes.
Thanks, Kai. I'm filling in for Eugenia tonight. She's taking a well-earned afternoon off. So I'll give you a quick advocacy update. Last night at the Landmarks Board meeting, we had some great news. 2 new landmarks, all of them happen to float on Lake Union. On the left-hand side is the Wagner floating home, also known as the Old Boathouse. It was designated, and so were all of the original floating buildings of the Center for Wooden Boats on the right-hand side. These were all, Wagner floating home was the home of Dick and Colleen Wagner, and they were the founders of the Center for Wooden Boats. And Dick was also an architect, and he happened to design the buildings for the Center for Wooden Boats. So all the buildings built in the 80s, all of which are floating, are the ones that were designated. Coincidentally, they were both unanimous designations, and they both were designated under standards B, C, and D for their connections with the Wagners, for advocating for the floating home community, and for being the founders of the Center for Wooden Boats. C for the connection to Lake Union's maritime history, and of course the history of the center. And then D for these kind of unique building types that are unique to Seattle and unusual kind of in the South Lake Union or in the Lake Union community. So I also want to acknowledge Sarah Martin, who did an amazing job with both designations. Historic Seattle was the co-nominator for the Wagner floating home. So that's great news. Next slide. We are also working on the designation of the Fairfax apartments, and I've been helping the HOA of the Fairfax building. And I see that Susan Beardsley is on the meeting today. She's done an amazing job of authoring the nomination and helping with her actually doing the presentation. I've been assisting her through this process. And so it was unanimously nominated on May 5th, and the designation meeting will be on June 16th. And we are putting together that presentation, and we look forward to this building, which is a really sweet little Gothic Revival building on 10th Avenue East across from around St. Mark's. A great building by James Blackwell. It was his own, it was a building he actually built for his own investments, which is kind of unusual for an architect. So that again will be June 16th. And then just a brief update on the showbox. There isn't much going on, but the Landmarks Board recently approved an extension for consideration of controls and incentives until October 6th. So there won't be much public announcement on the showbox until probably the fall. And hopefully the showbox will be getting back into business by then as well. So those are my advocacy updates. And I guess if there are any questions, I'll take them. And then before I move into the program. Otherwise, we can put up the Paul Theory slides. So this project came from our program staff put together a series of bike tours in recognition of National Bike Month and Preservation Month. 3 bike tours that kind of twiddle around Seattle and provide a way to visit and learn about all the, or many of the projects by Paul Theory in Seattle. Paul Theory was a unique architect. He has an amazing history. He was called the father of Northwest modernism, and he was the architect to introduce Seattle and Puget Sound to European modernism, a style that is characterized by pure forms, clean lines, and with a definite focus on emerging technologies. In this era, it was steel, glass, and reinforced concrete. Theory himself, he was born in Nome, Alaska in 1904. And his parents had come from France to work there. His father was a mining engineer and he was working in the Klondike gold rush. And in 1914, Paul Theory's father returned to France to fight in World War I and left Paul and his mother back in Alaska and never returned, unfortunately. Paul's mother, Louise, created a business importing French fashions for wealthy families in Alaska and Seattle. And she dressed celebrities such as Sarah Bernhardt and Isadora Duncan. So a unique family. Next slide. So Paul Theory started his education studying medicine at the University of Washington and eventually changed to architecture. This is one of his student drawings from 1925, very much in the Beaux-Arts style that was popular, or that represents the work being done at the UW at that time. It's a design for a tennis court building, and you can see from the truss structure in the back of the building that Theory is already thinking about architectural design that's informed by engineering. While he was a student, he spent the summer of 1927 studying at the American School in Fontainebleau, France, and traveled in France for several months afterward. And he picked up a lot of kind of appreciation for modern design that was happening in Europe. He graduated in 1928 and obtained his architecture license to practice in 1929. And he first worked in the offices of John Graham and Henry Bittman before he opened his own office. Shortly after that, the Great Depression happened and there was no work, so he closed his office and decided to take a year to travel. He visited his classmate George Nakashima, who became a famous furniture designer in Japan, and then traveled through Asia, Europe, and Central America. In his travels, he met influential modernists such as Antonin Raymond and Le Corbusier. On his return to Seattle in 1935, Theory embarked on a lifelong practice in Seattle of over 50 years. He's best known for his work as the principal architect of the 1962 Seattle World's Fair and for designs of expressive, modern churches, houses, and institutional projects. Paul Theory's career left a lasting impact on the local built environment through a practice focused on research, architectural design, campus design, and urban planning. Now I'll go through a list of projects that represent just a small sampling of the progression and breadth of his career. Next slide. So this is the Lake Crest apartment court in Madison Park. He did this project just out of architecture school with a partner, James M. Taylor. And he designed the southern section of this collection of 5 revival style apartment buildings. Other sections of the complex were designed by William Bain Sr., Bain in collaboration with Lionel Priest and Frederick Anhalt. This early project reflects Theory's more conservative historicist work in the French Norman style, before his travels around the world piqued his interest in modernist design. Next. This is Paul Theory's own house, inspired by his travels. It's in Denny Blaine. Theory envisioned a house for himself and his mother, which embodied modernist ideas. He designed a pure box form of a house raised on pilotis, like stilts, where the site's topography and landscape would be undisturbed. However, he was unable to obtain financing for such a non-traditional house. As built, the house was still modern with its asymmetrical form, flat roof, lack of ornament, and use of new materials like prefabricated steel windows, steel railings, floor-to-ceiling plate glass windows, and sliding doors. The house is fairly closed at the street, but opens at the rear to gardens and features an open floor plan. Next. Here you can see the house today. It's still intact, although some windows have changed and it's clearly not its pure modern white color anymore, but you can see the windows and the railings are still there and the house seems elevated off the site as it was originally. It's really challenging to photograph this house. Next slide. This is the Chancery of the Seattle Archdiocese in First Hill, close to our offices. You can see the towers of St. James in the background. The building originally had a pyramidal central volume that was flanked by 2 single-story wings. The building looks quite different now. A practicing Catholic architect, Theory was interested in modern church design, and he co-authored a book called Churches and Temples in 1953. And he received many church commissions in the region throughout his career. This office building for the Archdiocese is clad in Wilkinson sandstone and reveals just a hint of ornament in some subtle incised floral panels. Next slide. This is the building today. Theory refused an offer to design this addition, complaining that the alterations would spoil his design and that the church would not have to expand. This is a quotation, not have to expand if it would just concentrate on its mission and forget about all the social programs they were getting into, unquote. He would not receive any more commissions from the Seattle Archdiocese. Next slide. This is the Nichols House of the same period. It's in North Capitol Hill. Theory did not have an easy time convincing his clients to embrace his enthusiasm for modernism. As such, many of his residential designs show a hybrid of traditional forms with modernist details. And the Nichols House certainly exemplifies this with its hipped roof form, while also featuring prominent steel corner windows, a masonry screen, and an occupiable garage roof, all composed in pure white stucco. Next slide. This is the Martin and Ekman men's clothing store. It was built in 1949 on the Ave and 45th Street. Martin and Ekman first opened in 1923, and they were a staple on the Ave for men's clothing, occupying several locations before hiring Theory in 1949 to construct a new store on the southwest corner of Northeast 45th Street and University Way. The building is a shimmering glass box with both primary transparent facades allowing for the display of fashionable goods held inside. The building has not been treated well by recent tenants and is certainly at risk in the burgeoning redevelopment of the U District. Next slide. This is the Northeast Branch Library, north of the university. It reflects the post-World War II growth of Seattle. It was constructed to serve expanding single-family neighborhoods north of the university. With its sweeping post and beam gable form constructed of steel and glue laminated beams, Theory's design was meant to conform to the residential district it served, with huge windows, deep overhangs to protect interiors from direct sunlight, and the integration of landscape. The design was immediately published in local and national publications. The building received an AIA award in 1957. While still an investigation of emerging building technologies, this time in wood, the library reflects a softening of the pure modernism of Theory's earlier work. The Northeast Branch Library was designated a City of Seattle landmark in 2001. Next slide. This is the Cedar Park Elementary School in Cedar Park at the very north end of the city. Also built to help meet the needs of a burgeoning post-World War II Seattle population. Cedar Park School opened in 1959 and operated as a neighborhood elementary school until it closed in 1981. It then became the long-term home to a community of Seattle artists. Collaborating with structural engineer Peter Hostmark, Theory's design was for an innovative structural system of exposed precast concrete frames, tilt-up concrete walls, and precast concrete roof panels, exemplifying Northwest modernism in concrete. The school was designated a city landmark in 2012 and was recently rehabilitated and reopened for its original use as a school. Next slide. This is St. Demetrios Greek Orthodox Church in Montlake. A modern interpretation of Byzantine vaulted architecture, Theory was hired to design a new church for the Greek Orthodox community when their proposed church site in the Uptown neighborhood became part of the fairgrounds for the Century 21 exposition in 1962. Continuing Theory's interest in building technology, he again worked with Peter Hostmark to design 8 intersecting vaults of thin shell concrete, topped by a central precast lantern. The technology allowed for expansive luminous openings filled with multicolored glass, supported by a striated brick exterior, which helps to blend in the residential neighborhood. The original landscape was by Rich Haig. Next slide. This is the Washington State Coliseum. We now call it the Climate Pledge Arena in Uptown. The iconic Washington State Coliseum continued Theory's exploration into building technology, again in collaboration with Hostmark. As the unique hyperbolic paraboloid roof form emerged, the press called the building a giant aluminum teepee. The arena had no interior roof supports. The aluminum paneled roof was supported by steel compression trusses and nearly 6 miles of steel tension cables. As the principal architect of the 1962 World's Fair, Theory collaborated on the creation of the campus with other prominent designers, including Minoru Yamasaki, Lawrence Halprin, and John Graham, and others. After the fair, the Theory oversaw the excavation of the exhibition hall, which is seen on the right right photograph on this slide. Sorry, I lost my notes here. Converting it into a sports and performance venue, of course. The Coliseum was designated a city landmark in 2017, meeting all 6 designation criteria. So it's kind of a one of the few kind of landmark slam dunks that meets all 6 criteria. Paul Theory's experience with the World's Fair would propel him into national prominence, serving on the planning committees for the state capitol campus, as well as the National Mall in DC. He became an active participant in public debates in the city on design, architecture, and planning, and he advocated against the construction of the Highway 99 viaduct on the waterfront, as well as Interstate 5 through the city. Next slide. Besides the arena, Theory designed several other temporary buildings for the fair. This is the Ford Motor Company building, and you can see the character of, through his drawing, the character of the building itself. His style had kind of changed over the years as architectural styles also shifted. And a lot of these temporary buildings were really fanciful and were only designed to be there during the fair. They were demolished afterwards. Next slide. This is the Washington Mutual Savings Bank. It's downtown on 2nd Avenue. It's a mid-century downtown bank building that replaced the former home of Washington Mutual, which had been housed in a solid masonry bank building constructed in 1899. The modern replacement created a feeling of space and air with recessed windows and balconies, creating an interplay around the 4-story tall prefabricated columns, which were poured 15 miles away in Redmond and then trucked to the site. Washington Mutual occupied the building for 40 years until the financial collapse of the bank in 2008. It's now occupied by designers who can be inspired by the work of their predecessor, Paul Theory. Next slide. I thought it would be good to show a few projects that are no longer with us, but also are important to the body of Theory's work. On the left side is Theory's own office. He designed it at 800 Columbia on First Hill, sorry. Designed it in 1946, and it's where he would practice for his entire career over 50 years. And it was demolished in 2012. On the right-hand side is the original look of the Mohai building, which was really a clear and beautiful expression of Theory's appreciation for European modernism. It was much altered during the years and was eventually demolished as well in 2015 and 16. Next slide. I thought I would close with this slide of Northgate Elementary School. Theory claimed to be inspired by the Northwest Coast native culture and acknowledged the influence of longhouse structures in his designs. Northgate Elementary School shows this design inspiration with its pure long gabled forms and express structure. Unfortunately, the Seattle Landmarks Preservation Board voted against nominating the building in March 2020, and it's slated for demolition. In fact, the fence is up around the schoolyard, and we expect it to be demolished fairly soon. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
You start to get your questions. That was great. And sorry for my toggling. I was trying to respond to a question in the chat and it just failed. And also so sorry about the formatting. I should have checked the aspect ratio of my monitor. So sorry that that bottom part was cut off, but the PDF does have like the full titles and information. So you all can see that when I send the follow-up email.
Cool, that's great.
And now I'll hush for questions. If there are any. And questions for anyone, questions for Jeff, Kai, Naomi, Jane, or comments. We'll take your compliments and praise.
I'll ask a question.
Great.
From our Paul Theory expert. What's your favorite Theory structure, Jeff?
I think my favorite one that isn't around was Mohai. It was really cool. It had a lot of Native American motifs kind of inscribed in the concrete. It was really a beautiful building, but it kind of got ruined over the years as well. So it was probably at its best when it was first built.
How about existing structure?
Well, it's hard not to love pretty much everything about the Century 21 campus, Seattle Center. I mean, I think his impact there, even beyond just the buildings, but the planning and kind of the experience of being there is really, it's really his hand that shows up. So, yeah.
Hi, Jeff. It's Shaun Hubbard. I have a question.
Hi, Shaun. Nice to see you.
Thank you for saying those good words about Northgate School. I have a question about the landmark status, and some of the reasons that were given was that it wasn't Theory's best work and that Cedar Park is a better example. What do you think Paul Theory would say about that?
I've heard that Paul Theory was kind of a grumpy character to begin with. That's what a lot of architects who worked with him said. He kept his office too cold and didn't really like being told what to do or being questioned. I think that he would have thought that Northgate was a beautiful work as much as any other one was. If you look at the drawings, the original drawings of that building, they really have a delicate hand, and they have a certain amount of like bone-like quality. Like they're thickened in areas where there are more stress on the building and thinner in other areas. And I think sometimes it's hard to look past condition in a landmarks hearing, because the building has not been maintained that well. So it's really hard to see kind of the bones of what's down there through all the mess that happens with flashing and then roofing changes and, you know, insulation and overgrown landscape. So yeah, I'm sure that Theory thought it was a perfectly fine school, as did I.
Yes, as did I.
Right.
Even going there, I didn't even know who Paul Theory was. You just feel the good feeling of the building.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Maybe you can add a spur to your bike tour to go over to Northgate, because it'll be a farewell then.
Yeah, there you go.
hard to say that, but it's anyway. Thank you. Thanks again.
Sure.
Are there any other questions for Jeff or anyone else on our team?
Yeah, I'll ask a question. It might just be for my own benefit because it's kind of old news at this point, but I saw that the Stone Cottage was successfully moved off of the original property and is like being stored somewhere. What is the status of that?
Can someone else answer that? I don't have like a strong sense of where we are with
Nobody knows.
Yeah, no, I get the committee meets weekly to talk about the process of moving the Stone Cottage, and it is planned, but it has not been moved yet. I think they're looking for a date in June with the city and all of the permits that they need for the street and the move, but it will be moved over the next few weeks and settled into its new location, port property for now.
Okay, so there's not like a final destination that's
There
been
is a
decided
hope
upon?
for a final destination that isn't set enough to announce, but it'll be safe at the port location until they can figure out the final place to have it where it has more public access.
Gotcha.
Does everyone know what the Stone Cottage is? Maybe Naomi, you've been heavily involved in meetings. Is there a elevator pitch, elevator speech type of concise about the Stone Cottage?
See if I can use my architecture terms correctly. The Stone Cottage is a vernacular building on Alki that was constructed by a woman named Eva, and she walked over to the beach on Alki and picked up rocks and built a house. And so if you've driven along Alki coming into West Seattle, you may have noticed this small square structure that's entirely stones, and that's what the story of that place is. And the obviously the property value there is very high, and the building was quite small and had been falling into disrepair since Eva passed. And so the family sold it to a developer, but the developer was very interested in working with the West Seattle Historical Society and people in the community who wanted to preserve the building. And so they gave a number of years of time to get the process all lined up to move the stone house to another property. And from there, the group, the coalition, will be working to restore the interior of the space and make it eventually a public access project.
I think you're showing off your architectural terms. I heard vernacular there.
That was the one I was worried about.
Nice work.
I think upcycled might be another term for finding rocks on a beach and turning them into housing. I'll put the link to that project in the chat for everybody in case anyone's interested in reading more about Eva and the story of the house. It's quite a unique thing that you wouldn't see these days.
Thank you all. Any other questions or comments for the good of the order? I know that we are an intimate group tonight. Save space for sharing. All right. Well, if not, it looks like we'll end 9-ish minutes early. I know it's a sunny evening in Seattle, so maybe you all can go out and breathe some of that good air, and we will see you at the next one whenever that happens. I can't do math right now, but these are quarterly, so in a few months. And I will follow up, as always, with the link to tonight's program and Jeff's presentation. Jeff, thank you again. That was really awesome. The minutes are essentially what I sent you all before. I'll send you again. So thank you, David, Jane, Kai, Naomi, Jeff. Thank you to Cindy. Cindy, I know that you're here and you're taking notes for us. Really, really appreciate you and all of the work that you do. And I think that'll wrap us up for tonight. So thanks y'all for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for hosting us,
Taylor.
Taylor.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.